The morning sun rose over Zelath Prime like it had for 300 years of peace. The crystal towers of the capital city caught the light and sent rainbows dancing across the peaceful streets. Elder Thys walked slowly through the meditation gardens, her tall, thin form moving like a whisper among the flowering trees. She was old, even by Zelathi standards. Her skin was so pale, it was almost see-through, and her large eyes held the wisdom of many centuries. Like all her people, she carried no weapons and knew nothing of war. The Zelathi had evolved beyond such things long ago. The garden was full of visitors from across the galaxy. A group of red-scaled Vorthak diplomats sat in a circle, working through a trade dispute with help from Zelathi mediators. Near the fountain, two species that had been enemies for generations were learning to speak peacefully, guided by the gentle touch of Zelathi minds. This was what Zelath Prime was known for. When the galaxy had problems that could not be solved with weapons or threats, they came here. The Zelathi could touch minds, feel emotions, and help others find peace. Their world was neutral ground, protected by ancient treaties that no one had broken in 3 centuries. Thys paused beside a young Zelathi named Kes who was practicing his meditation. The boy was barely 50 years old, still learning to control his mental gifts. His thoughts were bright and curious, untouched by fear or anger. "Elder," Kes said without opening his eyes, "I can feel something strange today, like a darkness coming from far away." Thys placed her long, gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. She had felt it too, a cold hunger moving through space, getting closer each day. But she pushed the feeling away. Nothing evil had ever come to their world. The treaties protected them. The galaxy respected their neutrality. "You are young," she told Kes softly. "Sometimes we feel the pain of distant worlds. It does not mean danger comes to us." But even as she said it, Thys felt the wrongness growing stronger. She looked up at the clear blue sky, where no warship had ever appeared. The Zelathi had no defenses because they had never needed any. Their greatest weapon was their ability to make others want peace. In the city center, the Great Council was meeting with ambassadors from 12 different species. They discussed trade routes and mining rights, marriage, customs, and language barriers. Everything was calm and orderly, as it always was on Zelath Prime. The Zelathi council members moved between the groups like dancers, their minds touching each visitor's thoughts to smooth away anger and frustration. They were masters of their craft, able to turn hatred into understanding with just a gentle mental push. Council leader Vex stood at the center of it all, his ancient mind coordinating the complex dance of diplomacy. He was even older than Thys, his body so frail it seemed like it might break in a strong wind. But his mental power was enormous, capable of calming an entire room with a single thought. The morning passed peacefully. Trade agreements were signed. Old enemies shook hands. Young diplomats learned valuable lessons about patience and compromise. It was exactly what the galaxy expected from Zelath Prime. Then the sensors started screaming. The first alarm came from the orbital stations that watched the edge of their solar system. The Zelathi rarely use such technology, preferring to solve problems through understanding rather than surveillance. But the galaxy had insisted they have some warning systems, just in case. The technician on duty was a nervous young Zelathi named Pren. He had never seen the sensors show anything more threatening than a lost cargo ship. Now his screens were covered in red warnings and flashing lights. "Ships," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Hundreds of them, maybe thousands." The ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They looked like they were grown rather than built, all curves and organic shapes that pulsed with dark energy. They moved in perfect formation, like a single living creature with many parts. Pren's hands trembled as he sent the alert to the council. Within minutes, Elder Thys and the other leaders were gathered around the sensor displays, their faces pale with shock. "What are they?" asked Vex, his old voice barely a whisper. The answer came from the visiting ambassadors, who recognized the ships with growing horror. The Corvan delegate, a tough warrior race, actually stepped backward in fear. "The swarm," he said. The Krek swarm. The name sent cold terror through everyone who heard it. The swarm was a legend, a nightmare that traveled between the stars, consuming entire worlds. They took everything: people, animals, plants, even the minerals from the ground. Nothing was left behind but empty rock. "But the treaties," stammered a young Zelathi council member. "Our neutrality. They cannot attack a sanctuary world." The Korvan delegate shook his head sadly. "The swarm does not make treaties. They do not recognize neutrality. They only know hunger." Elder Thys closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, trying to touch the thoughts of the approaching ships. What she felt made her gasp in horror. There was no individual consciousness, no separate minds she could reason with, just one vast, hungry intelligence that saw all other life as food. The ships were already past the outer planets, moving faster than anything the Zelathi had ever seen. The few orbital defense platforms that other species had given them were swept aside like toys. The swarm did not even slow down. "How long?" asked Vex. 6 hours, replied Pren, his voice breaking. "Maybe less." The council chamber fell silent. Around them, the visiting diplomats were already contacting their ships, preparing to flee. The Zelathi did not blame them. What could anyone do against a force that had destroyed star empires? Elder Thys stood slowly, her old bones creaking. She had lived through 3 centuries of peace, had helped solve thousands of conflicts, had seen the galaxy grow more civilized year by year. Now it all seemed like a beautiful dream that was about to end. "Send word to all our people," she said quietly. "Tell them to seek shelter in the deep places. Tell them to stay together, and to remember what we have built here." As the ambassadors fled, and the city began its first evacuation in recorded history, Thys felt the darkness growing closer. Soon the swarm would arrive, and their peaceful world would learn what it meant to face an enemy that could not be reasoned with. The age of peace was ending, and the Zelathi had no idea how to fight. The Krek swarm fell from the sky like a living storm. Their bioships blotted out the sun, casting dark shadows across the crystal towers of Zeleth Prime. Each vessel pulsed with alien life, covered in organic armor that shifted and moved like breathing skin. From their bellies poured creatures that had once been other species, now twisted and changed into swarm warriors. Elder Thys stood in the highest tower of the capital, watching her peaceful world die. The gardens where she had walked that morning were now battlefields. The meditation centers where diplomats had found peace were burning. The Zelathi had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight back. Below her, the city was in chaos. Her people ran through the streets, their pale forms moving like ghosts through the smoke. They had never learned to fight, never needed to. Now they were helpless as the swarm warriors hunted them down. A young Zelathi mother ran past carrying her child, tears streaming down her face. A group of elders tried to shield a class of students with their own bodies. Everywhere Thys looked, she saw the same thing. Her people dying because they had chosen peace over war. The swarm warriors were terrible to see. Some walked on 2 legs like twisted copies of humanoid species. Others crawled on many limbs, their bodies covered in sharp spines. All of them had the same empty, hungry look in their eyes. They were no longer individuals, just parts of the greater swarm mind. Thys felt that mind pressing against her own thoughts like a cold weight. The swarm consciousness was vast and alien, older than entire civilizations. It spoke to her without words, showing her the fate of her world. Her people would be taken. Some would be consumed immediately, their life energy feeding the swarm. Others would be changed, infected with swarm biology until they became warriors themselves. The planet would be stripped bare, every living thing absorbed into the collective hunger. "No," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the sound of breaking glass and screaming. The communication center was 3 floors below. If she could reach it, if the equipment still worked, maybe she could send a message to the galactic fleet. Maybe someone would come to help. But as Thys descended the tower stairs, she felt the hopelessness of other species who had tried to resist the swarm. Their final messages filled the galactic archives, desperate pleas for help that no one answered. The swarm was too strong, too numerous. No one wanted to face them. The communication center was damaged but still functional. Technician Pren was there, his hands shaking as he tried to contact anyone who might listen. His young face was streaked with tears. "Elder," he said when he saw her, "I have sent distress calls to everyone. The Corvin fleet is too far away. The Vorthak say they cannot spare ships. The others—" He could not finish. Thys nodded. She had expected this. The galaxy was full of species that cared about peace when it was convenient, but ran when real danger appeared. The Zelathi had been naive to think their neutrality would protect them. "Let me try," she said gently. Thys placed her hands on the communication array and opened her mind. Instead of sending words across space, she sent emotion. Pure, raw feeling that would reach anyone, with the ability to sense it. She projected the terror of her people, the helplessness of watching children die, the grief of seeing 3 centuries of peace destroyed in hours. She sent images of swarm warriors tearing through hospitals and schools, of beautiful cities turning to ash, of an entire civilization facing extinction. But more than that, she sent love. Love for her people. Love for the peace they had built. Love for all the species that had found healing on Zeleth Prime. She showed the galaxy what they were about to lose. Not just another world, but the place where understanding had triumphed over violence. The message burst out from Zeleth Prime like a psychic scream, traveling faster than light toward every corner of known space. Most who received it turned away, unwilling to face what it meant. Some wept for the Zelathi but did nothing. Others simply blocked the transmission to avoid the pain. But in a small exploration ship on the edge of the galaxy, Captain Sarah Chen felt the message hit her like a physical blow. Sarah was human, one of the newer species in the galactic community. Humanity had only made contact with aliens 50 years ago, and most of the galaxy still saw them as primitive newcomers. They had no great fleets, no ancient wisdom, no special powers. But Sarah Chen had something that most galactic species had forgotten. She could not ignore suffering. She was in her ready room when the psychic cry reached her. Sarah was not telepathic like the Zelathi, but the message was so strong that it broke through anyway. Suddenly she was feeling what Thys felt, seeing what the Zelathi saw, experiencing the death of innocence in real time. Sarah doubled over, gasping. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Torres, rushed in to find her on her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Captain, what happened?" "Get me a line to Firebase Omega," Sarah said, struggling to stand. "Emergency priority." "Ma'am, that's a military channel. We're exploration, not—" "Do it now." Torres hesitated, then activated the long-range transmitter. The signal would take hours to reach the nearest human military base, but it was their only choice. When the connection opened, a gruff voice answered. "Firebase Omega. Colonel Rodriguez speaking." "This better be important, Captain." Sarah had never met Marcus Rodriguez, but she knew his reputation. He was old-school military, a veteran of humanity's last civil war. He had no patience for politics or red tape. "Colonel," she said, "I'm transmitting data on a humanitarian crisis. An entire peaceful species is being wiped out by something called the Krex swarm. They're asking for help." There was silence on the other end. Then Rodriguez's voice came back, colder than before. "Captain, you know the rules. Humanity doesn't get involved in galactic conflicts. Earth Command was very clear about that. Sir, these aren't combatants. They're civilians. Millions of them." Sarah transmitted everything she had received from Thys. The images, the emotions, the pure terror of a species facing extinction. She heard Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath as the data reached him. "Jesus," he muttered. "How long do they have?" "I don't know, sir. Hours, maybe less." Another long pause. Sarah could almost hear Rodriguez weighing his options. Earth Command wanted humanity to stay out of galactic politics, to avoid making enemies. Getting involved with the swarm would be insanity. But Rodriguez was a Marine, and Marines had their own code. "Captain Chen," he said finally, "I'm going to do something stupid. But sometimes, stupid is all you've got." Back on Zeleth Prime, Elder Thys felt the communication end. Her message had reached across the galaxy. But she had felt the fear and hesitation in those who received it. No one was coming. Her people would die alone. She stood slowly, her ancient body trembling with exhaustion. Through the broken windows of the communication center, she could see swarm warriors moving through the streets below. Soon they would reach this tower. Soon it would all be over. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she felt something strange. A small spark of determination, burning bright in the darkness of space. It was different from anything she had sensed before. Not the cold calculation of most species, but something warm and fierce and absolutely unbreakable. She did not know what it was. She did not even know if it was real. But for the first time since the swarm arrived, Elder Thys allowed herself to hope. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez stood in the briefing room of Firebase Omega, staring at the data Captain Chen had sent him. The images from Zeleth Prime filled the screens around him. Burning cities, fleeing civilians, swarm warriors moving like a plague across a peaceful world. He was a big man, built like the football player he had been before joining the Marines. His dark hair was going gray at the temples, and his face was marked by scars from too many battles. The other officers in the room watched him nervously, waiting for his decision. "Sir," said Major Williams, his second in command, "Earth Command has been very clear. We don't interfere in alien conflicts." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He had received those orders himself, straight from the top. Humanity was still new to the galactic community. They needed to be careful, diplomatic, avoid making powerful enemies. "What do we know about this swarm?" he asked. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the intelligence officer, pulled up files on the main screen. "The Krek swarm is old, sir. Maybe millions of years. They've consumed entire civilizations. When they show up, planets die. No exceptions. How many ships? Estimates vary, but the Corvin military thinks they have at least 1,000 biovessels in their current fleet. Each one can deploy hundreds of warriors." Rodriguez did the math in his head. Even if they deployed every Marine on Firebase Omega, they would be outnumbered 50 to 1, and that was assuming they could even reach Zeleth Prime before the planet was completely overrun. "Casualties?" he asked. Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Sir, every military analysis says it would be a total loss. The swarm has never been defeated in open battle." Major Williams stepped forward. "Marcus, you know I'll follow you anywhere. But this isn't our fight. These Zelathi, they're not even human allies. Most of the galaxy doesn't even know we exist." Rodriguez looked around the room at his officers. They were good people, experienced soldiers who had served with honor. They trusted his judgment, and he was about to ask them to die for strangers. But he could not get the images out of his head. A Zelathi mother holding her child as swarm warriors closed in. Elderly aliens trying to shield students with their own bodies. An entire peaceful species being slaughtered because they had chosen understanding over violence. It reminded him of something from Earth's history. A small town he had read about, where civilians had been trapped between armies that did not care about innocent lives. The local military commander had been ordered to stay out of it, to let politics decide the outcome. Instead, he had sent his soldiers to protect the civilians. Most of them had died, but they had saved thousands of lives. History remembered him as a hero, but Rodriguez knew the truth. The man had simply been unable to watch innocent people die when he had the power to help. "Sir?" Major Williams was waiting for an answer. Rodriguez activated his comm system. "All unit commanders report to Briefing Room Alpha in 10 minutes. Full deployment briefing." The officers around him exchanged glances. Williams tried one more time. "Marcus, Earth Command will have our heads for this." "Let me worry about Earth Command," Rodriguez said. "Right now, we have Marines to brief." 20 minutes later, the briefing room was packed with Marines. They were a mixed group. Some were veterans of Earth's civil wars. Others had seen action in the asteroid mining conflicts. All of them had volunteered for the dangerous job of being humanity's first military presence in space. Gunnery Sergeant Torres stood at attention near the front. She was a small woman with fierce eyes and scars on her arms from close combat. Next to her was Corporal Santos, barely 22 but already a veteran of 3 boarding actions. Lieutenant Morrison sat with his squad leaders, checking gear and making notes. Rodriguez looked out at the 200 Marines who were about to follow him into hell. They were good soldiers, but they had never faced anything like the swarm. Most of them had never even fought aliens before. "Marines," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm going to be straight with you. We have received a distress call from a planet called Zeleth Prime. The people there are peaceful, no military, no weapons. They're being attacked by something called the Krex swarm." He activated the wall screens, showing the footage from the planet. The Marines watched in silence as the images played: cities burning, civilians running, warriors that looked like nightmares made real. "The swarm has never been defeated," Rodriguez continued. "They have destroyed civilizations that had millions of years to prepare. They outnumber us by more than 1,000 to 1. Earth Command has ordered us to stay out of galactic conflicts." He paused, looking around the room. Every Marine was focused on him completely. "But those people down there aren't combatants. They're not soldiers, or politicians, or anyone who chose this fight. They're families trying to protect their children. They're teachers and doctors and farmers who never hurt anyone in their lives." Sergeant Torres spoke up from the front row. "What's the mission, sir?" "We're going to drop onto Zeleth Prime and buy time for civilian evacuations. We'll hit the swarm hard enough to make them focus on us instead of hunting refugees. The goal is not to win. It's to save as many innocent lives as possible." The room was completely quiet. Rodriguez had not sugarcoated it. This was a suicide mission with almost no chance of success. They would be fighting an enemy that had conquered the galaxy, with no backup and no way home. Private Jackson, one of the youngest Marines, raised his hand. "Sir, how do we know these aliens are worth dying for?" Rodriguez nodded. It was a fair question. "Because, Marine, that's what we do. We protect people who can't protect themselves. That's what makes us Marines. Not just soldiers." He walked to the center of the room, making eye contact with as many of his troops as possible. "I won't order anyone to come on this mission. It's volunteer only. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so with no shame and no consequences. You signed up to defend humanity, not to die for aliens you've never met." Rodriguez waited, watching faces. Some Marines looked scared. They would be crazy not to be. Others looked determined. A few looked angry at the idea of innocent people being slaughtered. Gunnery Sergeant Torres was the first to stand. "I'm in, sir." Corporal Santos stood next. Then Lieutenant Morrison. Within 30 seconds, every Marine in the room was on their feet. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride so strong, it almost brought tears to his eyes. "All right then," he said. "Load for heavy combat. We deploy in 2 hours." As the Marines filed out to prepare their gear, Major Williams approached Rodriguez. "You know this is career suicide, right? Even if we survive, Earth Command will court-martial all of us." Rodriguez was loading his own rifle, checking each round carefully. "Maybe. But I'd rather face a court-martial than live knowing I could have saved lives and chose not to." 2 hours later, the assault ships lifted off from Firebase Omega. In the cargo holds, Marines checked their weapons one last time. They carried kinetic rifles that fired solid rounds at incredible speed, grenades designed to work in any atmosphere, and armor powered by fusion cells. They had no idea if their weapons would work against swarm bioarmor. They had no intel on enemy tactics or weak points. They were flying blind into a battle that had already been lost, but they were Marines, and Marines did not abandon civilians. As the ships jumped to hyperspace, Rodriguez opened a channel to all units. "Marines, in 1 hour, we're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to hurt the Krex swarm. We're going to show them what happens when they mess with innocent people, and Marines are watching. Some of us won't come home, but we're going to make sure those people down there get a chance to live." He paused, thinking of the Zelathi children he had seen in the footage. "Remember why we're here. Remember what we're fighting for. And remember, we're Marines. We don't lose. We just run out of ammunition. In the cargo hold, Sergeant Torres smiled grimly as she checked her shotgun one more time. Around her, 200 Marines prepared for the impossible. They were about to show the galaxy what humans were really made of. The drop pods cut through the smoke-filled sky of Zeleth Prime like falling meteors. Inside each pod, a Marine checked their gear one final time as alarms screamed and the heat of atmospheric entry made the walls glow red. Corporal Maria Santos gripped her shotgun and tried not to think about the odds. Through the small window of her pod, she could see the surface rushing up to meet them. The once beautiful city looked like a war zone, with fires burning everywhere and dark shapes moving through the streets. 30 seconds, shouted Lieutenant Morrison over the comm. Remember the drill, hit fast, hit hard, and give those civilians time to get out. The pods slammed into the ground with bone-jarring impacts. Santos kicked her door open and rolled out, shotgun ready. Around her, Marines were doing the same thing, spreading out across the landing zone with practiced efficiency. The first thing that hit her was the smell, smoke and burning metal, mixed with something sweet and rotten that made her stomach turn. The second thing was the sound of weapons fire echoing from all directions. Squad leaders, report. Colonel Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece. Alpha Squad operational, replied Sergeant Torres from somewhere to Santos's left. Enemy contact to the north. Bravo Squad good to go, called Morrison. I see civilians trapped in the temple complex, about 2 clicks south. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter. All units, remember the mission. We're here to save lives, not win battles. Find civilians, get them out, and make the swarm focus on us instead of them. Santos moved through the rubble with her squad, following Torres toward the sound of screaming. The swarm had turned the peaceful city into a nightmare. Beautiful crystal buildings lay shattered, their rainbow reflections now just scattered pieces in the ash. They found their first swarm warrior feeding on something in an alley. The creature had once been humanoid, but the swarm had changed it into something terrible. Its arms ended in razor-sharp claws, its mouth was full of needle teeth, and its eyes were empty black holes. Torres raised her rifle and put 3 rounds center mass. The kinetic bullets punched through the creature's bio-armor like it was paper, dropping it instantly. Well, she said grimly, at least our guns work. They moved deeper into the city, following the sound of Zelethi voices calling for help. The swarm warriors they encountered were fast and vicious, but they seemed unprepared for the Marines' tactics. Most alien species fought with energy weapons and defensive strategies. The Marines fought dirty. Santos kicked down a door and found 5 swarm warriors surrounding a group of Zelathi children. She did not think, did not plan, just opened fire with her shotgun. The first blast sent 1 warrior flying backward. The second and third rounds cleared the room. The Zelathi children huddled together, their large eyes wide with terror. They were so small and fragile, Santos thought. Like glass dolls in the middle of hell. It's okay, she said softly, kneeling down to their level. We're here to help. One of the children, a little girl with silver hair, reached out to touch Santos's armored hand. Are you angels? She whispered in broken standard. Santos felt something break inside her chest. These kids had never seen violence before today. They had grown up in a world of peace and understanding, and now they were watching it all burn. Something like that, kid, she said. Can you run? Meanwhile, Lieutenant Morrison was fighting his way through the temple complex with his squad. The building was huge and filled with hiding places where civilians had taken shelter. Unfortunately, it was also crawling with swarm warriors. Morrison's rifle barked steadily as he moved from room to room, clearing out enemies with methodical precision. Behind him, Private Jackson carried an injured Zelethi elder on his back, while Corporal Davis provided cover fire. Sir, Jackson panted. This guy says there are about 50 more civilians in the lower levels. But the swarm is between us and them. Morrison checked his ammunition. Half gone already. And they had been fighting for less than an hour. But 50 lives were 50 lives. We go through them, he said simply. The stairway down to the lower levels was a killing zone. Swarm warriors had set up defensive positions, and their bioweapons spat acid and razor discs at anything that moved. Morrison's first 2 Marines to reach the stairs were cut down immediately. But Morrison had learned urban combat in the ruins of Chicago during Earth's Civil War. He knew how to take ground that the enemy did not want to give up. Davis, grenades, Jackson, smoke. We're going in, hard and fast. The explosions shook the entire building. In the confusion that followed, Morrison's squad charged down the stairs like the devil himself was chasing them. They lost another Marine in the process, but they broke through. The civilians in the lower level were packed together like refugees, which is exactly what they were. Morrison had never seen Zalathi before, but he could tell they were terrified. Some of them were injured, others were in shock, and all of them had that look that civilians got when their world fell apart. "Anyone speak standard?" he called out. An elderly Zalathi male stepped forward. "I do, human." "You came to help us?" "That's the idea. Can your people move?" "Some are injured, but yes." "Where will you take us?" Morrison had no idea. The extraction plan had assumed they would have more time to set up safe zones. Right now, all he could do was get these people away from the swarm. "Anywhere but here," he said. Across the city, Colonel Rodriguez was fighting the battle of his life. He had set up a command post in the remains of the communication tower, trying to coordinate his scattered Marines while fighting off wave after wave of swarm attacks. The enemy was learning. The first few attacks had been disorganized, almost random. But the swarm was a collective intelligence, and it adapted quickly. Now they were coming in coordinated groups, using tactics designed to counter human weapons. Rodriguez's rifle was getting hot from constant firing. Around him, the surviving members of his command squad were running low on ammunition. They had been fighting for 6 hours straight, and the swarm just kept coming. "Sir," Sergeant Torres's voice crackled through his comm, "we've got about 200 civilians at Rally Point Alpha. But we can't hold this position much longer." Rodriguez looked at his tactical display. Red dots representing swarm forces surrounded every Marine position. They had saved thousands of lives, but they were being crushed by sheer numbers. "All units," he said into his comm, "begin falling back to the spaceport. We'll make our stand there." But as Rodriguez and his Marines fought their way across the burning city, something unexpected happened. The Zalathi they had saved were not running away. Instead, they were following the Marines, helping to carry wounded and watching for enemies. Elder Thys appeared at Rodriguez's elbow as he reloaded his rifle. She looked terrible. Her pale skin was covered in ash, and her clothes were torn. But her eyes were bright with something Rodriguez had never seen in an alien before. "Human," she said. "Your warriors fight like nothing I have ever seen. You face certain death to protect people you do not know." Rodriguez shrugged. "It's what we do." "No," Thys said firmly. "It is what you choose to do. And my people choose to stand with you." Rodriguez did not understand until he saw what was happening. The Zalathi were not just fleeing anymore. The ones who could fight were picking up rocks and improvised weapons. The ones who could not fight were forming human shields around the wounded Marines. For the first time in their history, the peaceful Zalathi were preparing for war. At the spaceport, the final battle began. Rodriguez had maybe 50 Marines left, and they were almost out of ammunition. Against them came the full might of the swarm. Thousands of warriors supported by flying creatures and biovehicles that spat death. It should have been over in minutes, but something had changed in the swarm's behavior. They were not just trying to win anymore. They were trying to understand. How had these humans hurt them so badly? How had they saved so many civilians against impossible odds? What made them fight so hard for strangers? The swarm's hesitation gave Rodriguez the opening he needed. "All units, concentrated fire. Make every shot count." The Marines' kinetic weapons tore through swarm ranks like chainsaws through paper. Every human seemed to be worth 10 of the enemy, fighting with a fury and skill that the swarm had never encountered. Corporal Santos, down to her last magazine, stood over the wounded Zalathi children and fought like a lioness protecting her cubs. Lieutenant Morrison, bleeding from a dozen wounds, kept his squad together through pure force of will. Sergeant Torres, her rifle jammed, drew her sidearm, and kept firing one-handed while she tried to clear the malfunction. And at the center of it all, Colonel Rodriguez fought with the knowledge that every minute they held was another minute for civilians to escape. He had come here to save lives, and he was not going to stop until the job was done. The smoke was so thick now that visibility was down to a few meters. Through the haze, Marines and swarm warriors fought hand to hand, kinetic weapons mixed with claws and teeth and desperate courage. But in that smoke, something impossible was happening. The swarm, for the first time in millions of years, was learning what it meant to be afraid. The first human reinforcement ships dropped out of hyperspace 18 hours after the Marines had landed. Admiral Sarah Chen, promoted from her exploration vessel and given command of the rescue fleet, expected to find nothing but empty ruins on Zeleth Prime. Instead, she found something impossible. The swarm was retreating. "Admiral," called her sensor operator, voice filled with disbelief. "I'm reading massive swarm ship movement. They're pulling back from the planet." Chen stared at her displays. In all of galactic history, the Krex swarm had never retreated. When they came to a world, they stayed until nothing was left. Yet here they were, abandoning a harvest that was barely half complete. "Take us down," she ordered. "I want to see what happened here." The spaceport was a battlefield unlike anything Chen had ever seen. The ground was covered with the bodies of swarm warriors, scattered like broken toys across the landing field. In the center of it all, a small group of human Marines held defensive positions around what looked like thousands of alien civilians. Colonel Rodriguez was still alive, but barely. He sat against a piece of wreckage, his armor cracked and bloody, while a Zelethi medic tried to treat his wounds. Around him, the survivors of his force looked like they had been through hell and somehow fought their way back out. Chen found Rodriguez as the medical teams were loading him onto a stretcher. His eyes were clear despite his injuries, and he managed a weak salute when he saw her admiral's insignia. "Sir," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. "Mission accomplished. Civilian casualties minimized." Chen looked around at the carnage. "Marcus, what did you do here?" Rodriguez tried to sit up, winced, and stayed on the stretcher. "We did our job, ma'am. We protected people who needed protecting." The full story came out slowly, as Chen interviewed the survivors and reviewed the combat footage. Her Marines had been outnumbered more than 1,000 to 1. They had faced an enemy that had never been defeated. By every military analysis, they should have been wiped out in the first hour. Instead, they had held for 18 hours, saved over 8 million civilian lives, and done something that no force in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made the swarm afraid. Sergeant Torres, her left arm in a sling but still on duty, explained it to Chen as they walked through the makeshift medical station. "The swarm had never fought humans before, Admiral. They expected us to fight like everyone else. Defensive positions, energy weapons, retreat when casualties got too high. Instead, we went straight at them." Torres gestured toward a group of Marines who were sharing their rations with Zelethi children. "And we didn't retreat, even when things got bad. I think that confused them. They're used to species that calculate odds and make logical decisions. We don't do logical when civilians are in danger." Chen nodded. She was beginning to understand what had happened here. The swarm was old and experienced, but they had never encountered anything like human military doctrine. More importantly, they had never faced an enemy that fought harder for others than for themselves. Elder Thys was recovering in the medical tent, but she insisted on speaking with Chen. The old Zelathi moved slowly, her frail body bearing new scars from the battle, but her mental voice was stronger than ever. "Admiral," she said, "your warriors saved my people. But they did more than that. They showed us something we had forgotten." "What's that?" "That sometimes peace must be defended with violence. That there are things worth fighting for, even if you cannot win." Thys turned toward a group of young Zelathi who were helping to treat wounded Marines. "My people have lived in peace for 3 centuries. We thought we were wise because we had evolved beyond conflict. But your Marines taught us that true wisdom is knowing when to fight." The aftermath was chaos, but organized chaos. Human medical teams worked alongside Zalathi healers to treat the wounded. Engineers from both species cooperated to restore power and communications to the city. For the first time in galactic history, humans were working as equals with an advanced alien civilization. But the biggest changes were happening beyond Zeleth Prime. News of the battle was spreading across the galaxy at light speed, carried by the survivors of the diplomatic corps who had fled when the swarm arrived. The story was incredible. Almost impossible to believe. A force of 200 human Marines had fought the Krek swarm to a standstill. They had saved millions of lives against odds that would have made veteran galactic military commanders surrender without firing a shot. More importantly, they had done it for free. Humanity had no alliance with the Zalathi, no trade agreements or mutual defense treaties. The Marines had died for aliens they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. On the Corvan homeworld, Military Commander Thok stared at the battle reports in disbelief. They had no heavy weapons, he said to his staff. No orbital support, no backup plan. How did they hold for 18 hours? His intelligence officer, a veteran of many campaigns, shook his head. Sir, our analysis suggests they never intended to hold. They were buying time for civilian evacuations. Their entire strategy was based on drawing enemy fire away from non-combatants. But why? Thok asked. What did they gain? The intelligence officer looked uncomfortable. Nothing, sir. They gained nothing. They did it because the civilians needed help. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. Military leaders who had spent centuries studying warfare could not understand how the humans had done the impossible. The answer was simple, but most species could not accept it. The Marines had fought so hard because they were not fighting for themselves. A week after the battle, Elder Thys stood before the Galactic Council to deliver her people's official statement. The Great Chamber was packed with representatives from every major species, all of them wanting to hear firsthand about humanity's impossible victory. Thys walked slowly to the central podium, her recovered mental voice reaching every mind in the chamber. When she spoke, her words were broadcast to every corner of known space. Honored delegates, she began. I come before you to speak of heroes. She paused, looking around the chamber at species that had refused to help when her people were dying. When the Krek swarm came to our world, we sent cries for help across the galaxy. We received sympathy, regret, and excuses. We received promises of aid that would arrive after our deaths. We received everything except actual help. The chamber was completely silent, but one species answered our call. A young species. Barely 50 years in our community. They had no obligation to help us, no treaties or trade agreements. They had been ordered by their own government to avoid galactic conflicts. Thys's mental voice grew stronger, filled with emotion that touched every being present. They came anyway. 200 warriors dropped from the sky into impossible odds because we asked for help. They died to protect children they had never met, fought to save a people they barely knew, and held the line against the greatest force in galactic history. She gestured toward the human observer section, where Admiral Chen sat in dress uniform. The galaxy told us that humanity was young and inexperienced. You were wrong. They are not inexperienced in the things that matter most. They know how to sacrifice for others. They know how to fight for what is right. They know how to answer when innocence calls for help. The speech continued, but Chen was no longer listening. She was thinking about Colonel Rodriguez, now recovering in a hospital on Earth. He would never walk normally again, and his military career was officially over. Though Earth Command had quietly decided that courts-martial were unnecessary. But Rodriguez was not thinking about his career. He was thinking about a letter he had received from a young Zalathi girl named Kess, who wrote to thank him for saving her school. She had included a drawing of Marines fighting monsters, and in the corner she had written, "Thank you for coming through the smoke." 6 months later, the galaxy was a different place. The Krek swarm had not launched another major offensive, apparently still trying to understand what had happened at Zeleth Prime. Several species had requested human military advisors. The Zalathi had established the Rodriguez Institute for Conflict Resolution, teaching other peaceful species that sometimes war was necessary to protect peace. But the biggest change was in how the galaxy saw humanity. They were no longer the naive newcomers stumbling through galactic politics. They were the species you called when the impossible needed to be done. In the rebuilt capital of Zeleth Prime, a memorial wall had been erected, listing the names of the 48 Marines who had died in the battle. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see it, trying to understand what kind of people would sacrifice everything for strangers. At the base of the memorial, an inscription was carved in 50 different languages. They came through the smoke so others might see the light. Elder Thys visited the memorial every day, placing flowers and speaking with the families of the fallen Marines who came to see where their loved ones had made their final stand. She never forgot the lesson she had learned during those 18 hours of hell. Sometimes, when darkness comes for the innocent, heroes answer the call. Sometimes, they even win.